Welcome, everybody. I would like to thank you all for joining the Marilyn Smith Solidarity Series webinar, What is Anti-Semitism? This event is a partnership between Marilyn Smith and Marilyn Hillel. I'm Allison Shores, Executive Director of Alumni Relations at the Smith School, and I'd like to welcome the Maryland community for joining us this evening. We appreciate you being here for this important conversation. I'd like to give a special thanks to our moderator, Rabbi Ari Israel, for leading the conversation, and to our panelists, Avital Kimchi and Gabe Willis, for sharing their experiences and guiding us as the TERP community continues to grow and learn together. A few logistics before we start. I'd like to ask everyone to keep your microphones on mute to help reduce some background noise, and you're welcome to keep your cameras on. Please be aware that we are recording and captioning the program so we can post a digital recording to the Marilyn Smith website later this week. The panel discussion will be around 25 minutes, and then we'll answer any questions you have after that time. So please post your questions in the chat area anytime during the conversation. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our presenter, moderator. Rabbi Israel is in his 22nd year as Hillel Executive Director in College Park. In addition to the rabbinic ordination, Ari has a master's degree in medieval Jewish history as well as secondary education. Ari is an adjunct professor at the University of Maryland, teaching Jewish leadership, and also teaches for the Acarel Jewish Leadership Institute in Baltimore. He is married to Susie, and their 6 children reside in Silver Spring, Maryland. He is also an amateur photographer trying to pick up golf to avert a midlife crisis. I will now turn it over to Ari.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Allison. I became a grandfather, actually. It's not on my bio, but that's probably the only thing I really am most proud of right now at the moment. So thank you, Allison, on the Smith Alumni Solidarity Series for this evening. And as you introduced Gabe and Avital, we have 2 wonderful presenters this evening. Avital Kimchi is a 2016 Smith undergrad, now living in Miami. And Gabe Willis is a 2020 MBA residing in Atlanta. So we have a little Southern diversity with us, and hopefully we'll have a rich conversation. And we ask you, as Allison shared before, if you have questions and you want to, chime in, we will have an opportunity in about 25 minutes. You can chat me on the Zoom chat and just say, I'd like to ask a question. If you want me to ask the question, you want to be anonymous, you can pose the question just to direct message me. But hopefully we'll have a robust conversation and dialogue, and we have some opportunities really to hear from Gabe and Avital, and also open it up for a community conversation. For many of us on this call, anti-Semitism is something that is real, something that people have felt. If it's not personal, it is certainly something that has impacted the American Jewish community over the last several years, but also decades and part of our history. As Allison referenced, I have a master's degree in medieval Jewish history, and anti-Semitism, unfortunately, has been with the Jewish people for thousands of years. It is not a new phenomenon that just developed just in the last few months. The largest tragedy, but it's certainly not diminishing any other tragedy. What happened in Pittsburgh is just 2.5 years ago at this point. The ADL really focuses on what it means to think about anti-Semitism and incidents in the United States. Recorded that in 2019, there were 2,100 acts of assault, vandalism, and harassment, a 12% increase over prior years. And the FBI recorded 953 hate crimes against Jews in 2019. A 14% increase from 2018. And in 2019, just to point out here, hate crimes against Jews comprised 62% of all hate crimes based on religion, up from 58% in both the previous 2 years. So we know that this is real. We know it's present in society and around us, and we want to grapple tonight with how it manifests itself both on campus and in the workplace. But before I turn it over to our panelists, we want to define, to the best of our ability, what anti-Semitism is and how do we approach it. The question is, do we know it when we see it? The smell test. How do we wrap our heads around what anti-Semitism is? For some, it's more of an art than a science. For some, it's knowing it only when you see it. And for others, it's an academic approach. And there are scientists and researchers who are studying this on a regular basis. The most clear and broad definition, as defined by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, IHRA, and has been accepted by many of the major Jewish organizations in America, and is defined as: anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred toward Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed toward Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and or their property, toward Jewish community institutions and religious facilities. Very quickly, once again, IHRA, anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred toward Jews. And they have many other sort of ramifications. What does this mean? How does it manifest itself? And sort of some case studies around that. And more recently, there's another organization, and there are several because there's a lot of controversy about this and how do we actually define it. The Jerusalem Direct Declaration on Anti-Semitism, in a very succinct manner: anti-Semitism is discrimination, prejudice, hostility, or violence against Jews as Jews, or Jewish institutions as Jewish. So that is some of the background about what's out there, what people are feeling. Do Jewish students on University of Maryland feel safe? Do you, Avital and Gabe, feel safe in your workplace? And do any of us on this call really feel and manifest itself? We'll talk about Maryland a little later in our conversation. But I first want to start off and ask Avital, Gabe, how has it manifested itself in the workplace or shown up that you've experienced in your own work over the last few years?
I can start us off. I'm Avital. I would say I've only seen like very microaggression type of anti-Semitism in my experience. I being in large companies that I've worked in, I don't think that I think a lot of people are aware and are respectful, but there's little things that come up here and there. I have a very hard name to pronounce, both my first name and my last name. And at a lot of my jobs, there are probably the majority of people who just don't take the time to ask me how to pronounce it correctly, ask me what the origin is, or they do ask me what the origin is and then decide not to pronounce it correctly either way. And it's like little things like that come up that just make you feel like a little bit uncomfortable sharing your background. Microaggressions, like I said.
Thank you, Avital. Gabe?
Yeah, and before I answer that, I just kind of want to touch on the anti-Semitism definition. And I think something that kind of resonates with me is that it's a lot harder to see anti-Semitism than you might think. And I think a lot of times these microaggressions, it happens, and then afterwards you realize that it happened. And so I think sometimes it's harder to grapple with these types of microaggressions when we're thinking about anti-Semitism. But in relation to the workplace, so kind of like Avital, I haven't experienced so much anti-Semitism in the workplace. Full disclosure to everybody on this call, I lived in Israel for 6 years. And so, obviously a different environment. But something that I will say while I was at school and now that I'm in the office place, taking off time for Jewish holidays, and there are a lot of Jewish holidays, specifically in the fall. And so really trying to take off that time and have it be understanding from your management or from your direct manager is definitely something tough, because you only get so many vacation days. And this seems like such a small thing, but when it adds up, you're taking 4, 5, 6 vacation days just for a Jewish holiday. And your coworkers don't have to make those kind of choices with their time. So I think that's something that's interesting that kind of goes under the rug a little bit when we are in the workplace.
Thank you. Thank you both. I appreciate your sharing your own thoughts and, your own experiences from that perspective. Just to shift a little bit, and, perhaps it overlaps with your first response. Have you run into any anti-Semitic stereotypes or, comments that you've heard, or friends of yours that, you've encountered? And more so is, how would you explain to them why it's wrong, right? So Avital, you reflect a little bit about your name, and that's been a challenge for you in the workplace. But have you sort of engaged that aspect of that sort of educational moment to speak to the other.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I get like little comments all the time that I think people think are more appropriate than they are. And it's jokes about stereotypes that I think people assume are just common and like fair play. So, my old office used to get bagels on Friday. And obviously, being the like resident Jew, I would get a lot of bagel and schmear jokes on Fridays. And, the first one might be funny and give it a light chuckle. But then when like 5 or so people have stopped by your desk to comment on the fact that it's bagels and schmear right now, it gets a little bit insensitive. Things like that. In one of my interviews, actually, I encountered somebody who went to a school similar to Maryland where they had a large Jewish population. And, he actually was Jewish and yet made a comment about like, there are some really serious Jews on this campus and things like that, that were just like, I was a part of the Hillel community and I was very involved, and it just made me feel a little bit uncomfortable, as if I was being judged for choosing a life that was a religious life and being a part of a community that I chose to be a part of. So little comments like that just go a little bit too far.
Thank you, Avital, for sharing that. Gabe, and what have you encountered? And also, if you have experienced or you've heard of things, what was your reaction, right? It's one thing to passively listen, right? And as Avital reflected, it gets annoying. The first time's cute, but then it just starts to grate, but what is your role or what is your opportunity? And I think it's a question for all of us, right? What is our opportunity to educate and to reach out to others and share that moment and say, hey, that wasn't good, or do you feel comfortable doing that? That's hard to do.
Yeah. So I would say in the workplace, again, I've kind of just run into ignorance rather than kind of on purpose hatred in an anti-Semitic way. And I would say I try to take my role as educating people, as kind of Avital said, kind of the token Jew. And I haven't encountered any other Jewish people at my place of work yet, a year in about. So I do kind of take that role on as kind of this, this is Passover, right? That just happened, or, Rosh Hashanah, and just kind of telling them about it and talking about it and making it more mainstream or normal, and just really having it so that other people understand who I am, where I'm coming from. And I actually was able to kind of take that role when I was in business school as well, when I was at Smith. And so I think, we had a pretty small percentage of Jews in that class, and I was the JMBA president. And so I tried to take on that role when issues were arising in the Jewish community in the world. I think when I was at school, that Pittsburgh shooting that you mentioned happened. So various things happened within the Jewish community while I was there. And I would always try to take that role as kind of educator. And I think I had people coming to me to ask. And so I think that was a great place for me to be, and a great way to talk to people and get people on the understanding part. There is one incident that when I was at business school, one of my peers did have an offhand comment. It had to do something with country clubs and Jews. Wasn't great. I kind of reflected on it post the comment, kind of how I said before, where it's hard to see it when it happens. And then afterwards, it's a lot easier to reflect on kind of what happened and what to do going forward. And so, I never approached this peer about that comment, but it's definitely something that stuck with me. Obviously, it was something super small, and we're 2 years later, and so I still know it. But I think it's things like that education can really help deter and really help to make it easier for people to understand kind of the Jewish culture, because that's really what it is. It's not just a religion; it's also a culture, and I think anti-Semitism kind of hits all of those.
Thank you, Gabe and Avital, for your thoughtful responses there. Just want to shift gears a little bit, and I want to intro this question about diversity and inclusion, which is important in the United States fabric right now. You mentioned before about culture, and there's a lot of culture in the workplace about diversity and inclusion. And I want to reflect briefly about what's happening in Maryland in this area. And the question really is, like, many organizations, companies, universities are focused on D&I, and not always including Jewish employees. And the question I'm going to ask, but I want to intro is how has your company made any effort to include Jewish employees in diversity inclusion? And what would you recommend they focus on? So in Maryland, and just this is my, as Allison introduced before, I've been here almost 20 years, and I am not aware of any public conversations, and this is actually thank you to the Smith School for organizing this, any public conversations outside of, the Jewish community. And, Hillel has run some activities and education about anti-Semitism. I teach a course on Jewish leadership, and we talk about it, and we have it in the conversation. But the university, actually, the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, for their first time, is organizing right now, and I'm sitting on a task force with Jewish faculty, staff, and students to organize a educational series, hopefully a 4-part educational series in the fall. So we will be sort of thinking about it for the university at large. The question is, have you two, right, either encountered diversity and inclusion activities at your workplace, and has it included Jewish employees? And if yes, great, what has that been? And then if not, what recommendations would you make to your, diversity officer at your workplace to say, hey, we could focus on this, or, Gabe, you were talking about culture before, just as an example. So Gabe, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so my company does not do much on this front in general. And so there's definitely a lot of opportunity, I think we would call it, to do that. And so I think something I would recommend is really kind of just doing educational series, especially if the makeup of your company. You basically know who your company is, kind of where they might lack in the information. And so I think in my company, it's a Midwestern company. And so it's generally speaking, there are not a lot of Jewish people there, and there's a lot of education to be had. And I think sticking with this education theme would be great for that. But I would say, just kind of going back to your point about companies and D&I, when I was at school, we had a speaker come in from a pretty well-known company in the area, and he was their D&I officer. And he went through a lot of things that they were doing at the company to make that part of the culture, but they're better, and went through all the minorities that he works with. And obviously Jewish people were not part of that. And I think that is probably not an uncommon thing when you go through D&I for many corporations right now. And it's interesting because juxtaposed with all the statistics you just told us, it seems like it would be pretty sure thing that you should be including kind of Jewish people as a minority in a D&I conversation. And so I think there's definitely a lot of opportunity there to make those better.
Thank you. Avital?
Yeah, I mean, similar answer. There is a lot of D&I work that's done at all the companies that I've been with. And I don't think I've ever experienced like anything Jewish being a part of that. They definitely talk about like minorities in general. And like, in my mind, I was associated with that group, but no one's ever specifically called it out. And what I think would be helpful is, like everywhere I've worked, I've kind of found the people that are very understanding, and like with the Jewish holiday stuff, they say, no worries, like we're going to cover you just like you cover us on our holidays. And they're very understanding about that stuff, and just formalizing that a little bit more of, and making it part of the D&I process in not a huge way, but definitely including it and calling it out a little bit more formally, I think would be my suggestion.
Thank you. Thank you both. Shifting gears slightly, and then I want to get back to campus for probably our last question before we open up to conversation, is we've discussed, anti-Semitism, how real it is, how it manifests itself in many ways, and you two have been articulate about your own sort of microaggression or encounters. Some Jews have not encountered anti-Semitism per se, but have experienced anti-Zionism. Have you either encountered any moments that you feel comfortable sharing about Israel conversations in the workplace or on campus that, would border or dovetail with this conversation this evening? Gabe, we'll start with you again.
Yeah, so I think just kind of throwing some thoughts out here, anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism get twisted They get twisted a lot. And personally, I lived in Israel and I served in the IDF, and that's a very polarizing, that itself is a polarizing thing to talk about both ways. And so I have not felt on campus or at work, honestly, yet, I'm sure it's coming at some point, uncomfortable with sharing about those specific experiences. I do think there's a lot of nuance that goes along with sharing that kind of experience, especially being in the IDF. I think that's a whole another conversation in itself. But people are usually willing, especially at the workplace that I'm at right now, are willing to listen to it and willing to want to understand. They're interested in what that experience is. And so I definitely don't feel that kind of anti-Zionism vibe there. But on campus, full disclosure, I never really talked about being in the IDF publicly ever. That wasn't something that I really wanted to do. I didn't want to put myself out there to receive the probable anti-Zionism. So,
Thank you. Avital?
Yeah, it's definitely a topic that I try and stay away from as well, just because it becomes so political. I actually am an Israeli citizen. And so I do get that question a lot and asked about my feelings about things. And especially in the workplace, I just keep it out, just like people keep out any kind of political conversation. When I was on campus, I would say, there were definitely some experiences that we had with anti-Israel, or I'm not even sure what the correct term for it is, but just groups that didn't feel so happy with Zionistic views. And I was in an a cappella group, a Jewish a cappella group, when I was on campus, which is an embarrassing fact after the fact, but I will gladly share it. And we had interruptions during our performances by some of these groups, and it was definitely hard to tell whether or not that was anti-Semitic or anti-Zionist, because we sang Hebrew songs. And it really does get mixed up a lot of the time. So not really a comment on either subject, but definitely understand that it's a mixed up issue, and both are very hard to discuss with people.
Thank you. Thank you both. So I just want to reflect, just, sort of a last moment here, is about what's happened on campus over the last few years. We talked about Pittsburgh and, the University of Maryland. Hillel actually organized a vigil on campus that attracted several hundred students. And we actually had some students who were from the Squirrel Hill Tree of Life Synagogue who spoke. Unfortunately, over the last 5 to 7 years, I have seen an uptick in swastikas on campus. Every single one, almost every single one, except for one perhaps, have been on whiteboards or on bathroom stalls, right, scribbled in there. So, they're trying to be anonymous. They're not targeting Jews per se, although it's certainly a hate symbol. And, it is a symbol that is targeting Jews from that per se, but it's not on the Hillel building, or it's not on a Jewish, dormitory. Unfortunately, also last year we had an incident where a Jewish student, this was December 2019, and it actually concluded this story in March of 2020, just before COVID. A Jewish student received anti-Semitic text messages. She was actually in the Smith School, and it got to the level of harassment, and and another student was also impacted by this, and both of them, I was involved in the police getting involved, and a student was both arrested and expelled from the university because of that, sort of in a very extreme moment, an extreme case. At the same time, and I just want to sort of end and ask our two panelists as well, is, when you were here, what would you say the atmosphere was for Jewish students here, right? So I've just outlaid, right, that here a student was harassed and a student was expelled, right? Pretty extreme, right? The police actually got involved, and the university administration did a great job of responding to that, and we're on top of it immediately. And there were swastikas, unfortunately. There have been probably 1 to 2 a year, maybe sometimes even 3. But what was the general atmosphere when you were a student, both of you, right, on campus, right? Did you feel, did you see, did you sense, or sort of did these things go under the radar and not get noticed from that perspective, right? Because, and my question just to hone in on it is, you hear about incidents at different universities around the country and says, oh, I hear it, you know, in my capacity as, you know, trying to recruit students, people say, oh, I can't go to X university. That's just an anti-Semitic university. Jews aren't comfortable there, right? Or Jews, you know, how could you dare send your child to X place? It's just a place of just hotbed of anti-Semitism. So, you know, I just outlined some hot moments here at Maryland, right? What would you say was your experience, you know, both Gabe and Avital, in terms of like, did you sense it? Did you feel it? Or was it just, you know, it happened, but you didn't necessarily pay attention to it? And what would you, you know, tell others? Sorry. Thank you.
So I would say that I knew that last incident that happened last March when it finished up. We had read about that. I think me and most of my class had read about that one. But in general, I think, yeah, not much feeling on kind of anti-Semitic things going on campus. But what I will say is when I was on campus, what we didn't hear, and I think was kind of even more deafening from a one perspective, is that the university, Smith, whichever, is deciding whether to put out notes and, you know, messages about different incidents going on in the world. And so by choosing to do that, you're not doing it on everything, on every kind of DNI incident. You're then actively choosing not to put out messages about specific things. And so what I remember is not getting a message about the Pittsburgh shooting. I remember not getting messages about kind of things that had happened last summer that had to do with celebrities putting out anti-Semitic texts and, you know, everybody going wild about it for about a day and then it getting swept under the rug, but getting messages about other incidents that were happening last summer. And so what I was seeing was that there's a lot of picking and choosing going on from a DNI perspective of putting out messages of solidarity. And so I would say that's kind of what I felt most on that front. And it wasn't about anti-Semitism happening kind of on our campus specifically with specific incidents, but it was really like a lack of messaging about kind of anti-Semitism in general.
Thank you. And I'll reflect after I hear from Avital. I'll reflect a little bit about the university's messaging around Pittsburgh. It's a case study I use in my class. So I'll share in a moment.
Yeah, in my time on campus, I definitely felt safe. And I will say the Jewish population was one of the main reasons that I had come to Maryland in the first place. You know, I went to a Jewish private school for high school, and it was definitely a part of the consideration of where we were applying to different colleges. Just to touch on what you said, Ari, and I completely understand why there are some parents that feel, or some kids who are choosing one colleges that feel that there are some schools where they wouldn't feel as comfortable. Some of it just has to do with like the amount of Jewish people that are at the university, but some of it also just has to do with the messaging and comfort level that the Jews who are on campus feel. And I will say in my experience, I had a great experience, both just secularly and Judaically on campus. I felt comfortable almost always. The one incident that I could think of, I mean, I mentioned that like a few times our acapella performances would have gotten interrupted, or there had been some backlash there, but the one campus interaction that I had that actually I did have to get Hillel involved with was my freshman year. I had to reschedule an exam because of a Jewish holiday, and my professor made a very inappropriate comment. And, you know, especially as a freshman, and, you know, I was 19 years old, I didn't really know how to respond to that, like we just spoke about. And I got scared a little bit that maybe this was going to be my experience for the next 4 years. You know, it was also the high holidays, which are right at the beginning of the school year. You know, it's September, and it's always really hard, obviously, for all the Jewish kids to take off right as the school year is getting started and your first exams are coming up. But especially your freshman year, it's a red flag all of a sudden going off. And that made me pretty nervous. But dealing with the professor and having Hillel on my side definitely made me so much more comfortable. And obviously I didn't experience anything like that in the rest of my 4 years, but that just came to mind when you asked the question. Otherwise, very comfortable. Yeah.
Thank you. No, I appreciate it. Look, Maryland has one of the largest Jewish populations in the country. And as part of the Big Ten, a major public university. And when we were part of the ACC, also a major public university. We are blessed with a beautiful, thriving population, and the university administration has been very supportive and very, I believe, on top of things. And Gabe, I'll get back to the case study, in a little bit. Let's open it up now. It's about 7:30, a few minutes after. If there are questions, you can either chat. There are a few. There is, 2 questions in the chat I see right now. But also, we're a small enough group. If you feel comfortable unmiking yourself or unmuting yourself, and you want to just, pop in, that'd be great as well. And we can, address the panelists, and we'll go from there. So if anyone would like to open up, that'd be great. If not, I'll read from the chat, and we'll give a minute or so for someone to chime in right now. All right, as the proverbial teacher, you have to learn how long to wait, right? I tell my younger children, gotta learn how to wait. It's a virtue. So I feel like I waited long enough. Mark's shaking his head, saying, "Yeah, he waited long enough." Thank you, Mark. I appreciate the warm support there. All right, so there is a comment in the question, and if others have questions, please feel free to chime in. The question from Wendy is, any comments on the perception that Jews are white passing? So Wendy, I don't know, is Wendy still here? Yeah, Wendy is still here, at least we hope. I don't know if Wendy, if you want to clarify that, or I could try to take a stab at what you're referencing, but if you feel comfortable, Wendy. All right, so, white passing is, I think, we're Jews, I'm using the word American Jews for the moment. We're due, and I'll use the word we, where do I fit in, right? As an American, I'm a very proud American. I am white, and where do I fit in sort of into the cultural tapestry of American race? And where do Jews fit in with that, in terms of like diversity inclusion? So are Jews included in that? If that's supposed to be diversity, and diversity is non-whiteness, where do Jews fit into that? So I don't know, Gabe or Avital, if you've experienced it, you also could pass if that's something that you're not comfortable, and I can reflect a little bit as well.
I can jump in. Oh, sorry, Gabe.
Go for it. Good.
I actually, it's a tough question, because obviously the minority that we are a part of is not a visible thing. You can't walk into an office and automatically assume that I'm a Jewish girl. There are definitely people who try and say, like, you look like a classic Jewish girl, but that can't actually tell that. And so I actually had this conversation with a colleague of mine who is Black, and he was talking about how he has to actively, seek out help and colleagues that are maybe experiencing certain discriminations similar to he is. And he was, saying it, and I kind of shared my own experience, and he a little bit laughed it off. And we're friends, and it was like totally fine that he did that, but I definitely spoke to him about it, and I was like, yeah, I know that you think that this is nothing because people don't automatically assume that I'm a minority, but there are these things that happen. And I gave him a few more examples of some of the things that like we spoke about. And, you know, even for him, it was like an eye-opening moment that just because I don't look different, things might be happening to me because I am a minority. So I'm not sure if that really addresses your white passing comment, but that's kind of how I interpreted that.
Yeah.
Well, Wendy's back. We'll let Wendy respond in a second, but first, Gabe.
Yeah, no, just to add to Avital's comments, I would say, like, I understand kind of the white passing comment as, you know, being white and Jewish, you have different challenges than, you know, somebody else who would be classified maybe in diversity and inclusion talk. But at the end of the day, I think, you know, we are seeing these things like the Pittsburgh shooting. You know, that's a synagogue of white Jews that was targeted by a white male, and so there is some distinction happening there. And I think, you know, it's hard to only kind of use this white passing to look at Jews, because we see that there is this kind of segmentation of white and Jewish by so many people. And I think something that really spoke to that was the Charlottesville stuff in 2017. They're chanting, "Jews will not replace us." And so there's this distinction that I think people in the far right make between white and Jewish, even though on a daily basis, you know, I don't think a white Jew is facing the same kind of challenges, you know, that a Black person is facing. So I think there is a distinction there, but there's definitely more to, you know, uncover there to look at.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And the reality is that there are a significant portion of Jews of color in America that we cannot discount, whether that number is 10%, 12%, some studies have it up to 14%. There are, you know, Jews of European descent, which is a significant portion, certainly in American Jewry. In Israel, for example, which is in the Middle East, more than 50% of Israel are Jews of Middle Eastern descent, and are certainly not white Europeans. There are Ethiopian Jews who are a significant portion in Israel and are part of our race, our culture, our people. So, you know, Jews are not simply white, but, you know, Wendy, if you want to clarify a little bit, and a majority of Jews are included in that white, you know, whiteness, right? That is in the American tapestry.
No, thank you for all of those comments. That really helps me. I was actually more than anything trying to understand the perception or the thoughts of the people leading this call, because there is such a wide range of opinions out there. You know, one of the more disturbing things that I found in one of my other alma maters is, you know, the comment about Jews being white passing is thrown around pretty frequently, and it seems to be used to justify the structure that the diversity and inclusion teams are using when they present intersectionality or when they present how to fight against privilege. They use the fact that we are white passing to exclude us from the conversation. So, you know, more than anything, I wanted to hear if, you know, what I'm seeing is also being picked up on by you guys. And I think I'm hearing that we're seeing a lot of similar things.
Yeah, no,
so thank you.
I appreciate that. I mean, look, in Maryland, the undergraduate population, which is really where I spend a lot of my time in Hillel in particular, there was an organization, I think it was 58 minority groups, or a group of minority, I don't know how many, it was maybe a few dozen minority groups, made 58 appeals to the university administration, right, to address their needs and concerns, and Jews were not included in that. You know, because we do have a prayer space, and the Muslims said we'd like a prayer space in each building, as an example. And you know, it was an interesting sort of conversation and where Jews fit into that spectrum. So I think it is a challenge from that perspective. I see another question here. Can we explain more about Judaism? Is it a religion, a nationality, a culture? You know, Gabe, you actually referenced Judaism as a culture before. You know, so how would you define Judaism? And I think it's an excellent question. Not going to get to a quick answer here in the next 15 minutes, but if you want to take a quick stab, is Judaism a religion, a nationality, or culture? Or is Judaism a religion, nationally, and a culture, right? It's not necessarily an and or. So Gabe and then Avital.
Yeah, I think that's a tough one. So it's definitely a both at some point here. For me, my personal journey kind of grew up more on the religious side, kind of going to synagogue, going to shul, being in Sunday school, doing a lot of the religious aspects of it. And as I've grown up, to me, it's become more of a cultural thing for me. And so being in Israel, I kind of took on a lot of Jewish culture there, and I enjoyed that. And I kind of stepped away from that religious aspect. And so for me personally, I see it more as a culture, and I try to kind of embody different things like tikkun olam, and kind of, let's say, tikkun olam on one side, and kind of doing good in the world and kind of taking these social action type things in my life. But on the other side, Israeli culture and Israeli music and Middle Eastern food, and kind of that's kind of what embodies Judaism for me right now. And that's kind of just been my journey up until this point. And I'm sure, Avital has a different take on it. I think everybody probably has a different take on it. So.
Thanks, Gabe. Avital?
Yeah, I mean, it's similar. I think what you said, Ari, about it being an and rather than an or is probably the best answer. Definition wise, it's definitely a religion, I would say. But for me, it's all three. It brings up a memory of when I was in high school, they used to ask us if we were an American Jew or a Jewish American. And, it's not there's really no difference grammatically, but it's how you define that. And I remember thinking, like, I'm a Jewish American. I'm an American and I'm Jewish. But then I was like, but really, is my Judaism what defines me, or what is it? And I go back and forth on this definition. And I think about this probably weekly since I was in high school, about what is really my nationality, what is my culture, what is I know my religion is Judaism, but the other two aspects, it really goes back and forth. And like, yes, I am an American and I am patriotic and everything like that, but I am also an Israeli citizen and I am culturally Jewish. So I think it all intertwines. And for me, it's all three.
Thank you. We brought up before about the Pittsburgh incident on at Maryland, and I mentioned that Hillel ran a vigil. I just want to share for a moment, just give people a little bit of time if they want to think about other questions, because there aren't any. And thank you for putting that in the chat. I just want to share for a moment the university's response to Pittsburgh. And this is actually 2.5 years ago. The university administration has shifted since. I actually use this as a case study. We have a new vice president of diversity and inclusion that is, and Georgina Dodge has been with us for about probably under 2 years at this point. So if I could share my screen, let me just make sure I can. I think everyone could see my screen now. Is that correct? So this email came out, and Pittsburgh, those who remember it vividly, was a Saturday morning. So this email came out from the university Tuesday, October 30th, right? So what does that equal? 48, almost 72, right? Is that right? Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, right? Almost 72 hours, right? After Pittsburgh, actually more than 72 hours after Pittsburgh. And this is the vigil that actually was the night before. So Monday night, we organized a vigil, Hillel in this case, and the university sent out an email. So I actually use this as a case study, and I do believe the university has been responsive since. And Gabe, I think your point about when the university should or should not, make statements. It's a very hard business to be in, right? Every time unfortunately, there's a hate crime in any incident or any cultural bias, should the university or anyone be making statements, right? And they do make statements. The question is when and how often. So the university sent out this email. The reason you didn't see this, Gabe, even though you're a student here, is because the subject line says "Open Doors and Open Hearts, a statement of support." Right? That's the subject line was, and it was 3 days later. And it's, it's an email, and I'll share one other piece about this email. And then the other, I'm just going to stop sharing for a moment. Let me just get the other one up here. So the university then unfortunately, and this was October 2018, there was an incident that took place, unfortunately, in New Zealand. Those who remember, there's a tragic shooting at a mosque in New Zealand, March 2019. And unfortunately, there were 50 people killed at this mosque, and it was a horrific incident. It was actually on a Friday morning. The university sent out an email a few hours afterwards. And the university subject line is, "We stand in solidarity for our Muslim students, faculty, and staff," and give the resources. So it's just a very stark contrast, right? In the one incident post-Pittsburgh, it took 72 hours. And I can excuse part of it based on the fact that the university, is not fully in work, right? Not everyone's there on a Saturday, right? So by the time they got to the message and Saturday and then Sunday and then Monday, but Tuesday, right? Something could have got on sooner. And the university acted, within a few hours, right? Literally a few hours after this incident. And, this was in your inbox, Gabe. If you're still a student on campus, you would have received this email. And the last piece I just want to point out quickly, and then I want to, sort of share what university's done since, is that the Pittsburgh email, and I want to share it again, so if you read the email, actually, it talks about today in the wake of the devastating attacks on Tree of Life Synagogue and 2 African-American individuals racially targeted by gunmen in Kentucky grocery store. So, unfortunately, there was a shooting in a Kentucky grocery store that took place approximately a week or more than a week before the Pittsburgh shooting. And the university did not send out an email. But I think someone felt that if they're sending out an email about, Jews being killed, they also need to sort of include others in that, et cetera. I think it's an amazing case study, right, of what, in my opinion, the university did wrong. I'm going to use that language here. And how they've learned, and once again, the current administration, right? We have a new president university and a new diversity officer. So this is not the current administration. I think they've learned from this lesson about, sort of where things did not go well. And I also give them a lot of credit now for, sort of thinking, and I gave the example of the student who was arrested last year. The university did an amazing job really being on top of that. I'm going, it's not about how bad the university is. It's really about what we can learn from these lessons and how we can grow from them, et cetera, which I think is the opportunity to share. All right, are there other questions? That's just, I can talk about that more if people have more comments about that, but I think it's a pretty stark case from that perspective about where things did not go well and how actually they've learned and grown from them. Are there other questions that people have for our panelists or thoughts to share?
I mean, I would just add that it seems like in the current climate and the current things happening in the world, this is a great time for alumni and students and faculty and everybody that, cares about this kind of messaging going out for, Jewish incidents and being part of that conversation to kind of stand up and say something. And it seems like that's what's happening, kind of what you were saying, Ara, that you're doing that series in the fall. Yeah. But it seems like this is a great time to kind of make those changes and kind of make sure that's happening.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Right. And the university, once again, when there was the student was arrested in March, the university full throttle, right, sent out messages and
Right.
It was, they embraced it and they really were on top of it. I think there was a lesson learned from that. Avital, final thoughts or comments?
I can say that I'm glad that these events are happening, especially with 2 organizations that I was heavily involved with, Smith and Hillel. I'm not sure if they happened when I was in college. I will cough that up to me being a college kid. But as an adult, I definitely would have gone to more of them if I had known about them. And I'm just glad to see that this is happening. Happy to be a part of it.
Thank you. So before I turn it back over to Allison, I want to say thank you to both Avital and Gabe for giving of yourselves this evening, for sharing your own personal stories, for coming back to Smith and coming back to University of Maryland. One of the beauties of Zoom and COVID, and nothing really good about COVID in any shape or form, but the world has shrunk a little bit. and we're able to actually connect in a different way. So thank you for really, coming of and giving of yourselves and being a part of our community and our story and really giving back to our campus. And thank you for those who asked questions and engaged. And thank you, Allison and Smith Solidarity Series for being a part of this. I'm going to put in the chat right now before you go. My colleague at Berkeley, work at the University of Diversity Inclusion in Berkeley, and something I hope we're going to get to here, just put a educational series together. You can go to that link if you want. They actually put a video together, and I think they're doing a good job. And I hope that we're going to do that as well. And Maryland is really going to help to lead that forward. And I just want to end with one thought, is just a thought of as Avital, a question was about, is Judaism religion or not, etc. So just from my religious teaching for a moment, the Jewish story and part of our folklore is that we were exiled and we sort of faced destruction when we had infighting with each other. The Hebrew word is sinat chinam. Sinat chinam is that we just didn't get along. It's a very simple way to look at it. And Rabbi Cook, who was one of the chief rabbis of our people in the 1930s, passed away in 1935. Rabbi Cook was a big believer that the only way to combat sinat chinam, the only way to combat selfless hatred is ahavat chinam, is to spread a lot of love and to spread, the grace and to spread the educational moments, which Gabe and Avital were doing tonight. And I think it's an opportunity, as Gabe said before, is for us to really, take this and take the challenges that exist. And I didn't whitewash them when I started my remarks. University of Maryland is an amazing place for students, for Jewish students and students of all cultures and conversations with people from all diverse backgrounds. And we have a lot to learn from each other and to build upon each other and to really teach the world about what ahava, love, is for one another. And I hope that we can continue to spread that. And thank you again, Avital and Gabe. And back to you, Allison. Thank you, Allison.
Thank you so much, Ari, for moderating this conversation, which I think we all grew so much and learned, and that is what we want to continue to do with the Solidarity Series. So I appreciate you, Avital and Gabe, for sharing this evening, being so open and educating us all. And we look forward to continuing the conversations with the series, and also looking forward to the program in the fall that you mentioned to us. So until then, be well, go Terps, and have a great evening, everybody.